In today's episode, an anti-poaching team goes on the hunt for elephant poachers in the area, killing elephants to profit off their tusks. As the team follows the poachers' tracks, they make their way beside the riverbank, where an angry hippopotamus charges at them in deadly fit of rage. Hit that like button and subscribe right now. This is the terrifying hippo attack on Sphamandla Mthembu. Welcome to Final Affliction. Africa is no stranger to poachers. This problem that rages through the continent has nearly decimated the rhino populations completely, and countless other magnificent animals are in grave danger of being hunted out of existence, all just for their tusks, pelts, and to be traded under horrible and abusive conditions on the black market. But South Africa has been one of the leading fighters against these murderous crimes by fighting back against them with their own medicine. Long gone are the days when poachers were rounded up and released with only a slap on the wrist or a short prison sentence. Nowadays, illegal hunting is punishable by a sentence of time that is equal to first-degree murder, and the officers deployed to catch these hunters and trappers are given the right to kill on sight if they catch them. This is not just because the country is tired of losing its animals to this cruel and senseless practice. It's because the poachers themselves are armed to the teeth with military-grade weapons, and the officers out there looking for them are quite literally putting their lives on the line. More often than not, an altercation ends in a shootout. These officers are tough as nails. They're walking into an actual war zone when they take on the job. And once a team is assigned to one another, they become like family. They spend weeks on end in the bush, trekking and tracking, with only each other for company and under constant threat. You can't go to war without trusting the man next to you like you would a brother. Sphamandla Mthembu, 31, and his 3 fellow rangers were just that kind of team. They were out in November of 2023 at the Mauled Game Reserve, just 180 miles north of the city of Durban. Sphamandla was the senior officer of the 4, since he'd been working in the park for the past 8 years. Not that the other guys were wet behind the ears at all. They'd all worked in the profession for 3 years or more. Naturally, the most senior of the lot took charge. Luckily, the other guys didn't have a problem with this arrangement at all. Sphamandla had a sharp eye, good aim, excellent tracking skills, and most of all, he commanded respect. He never lost his cool in the face of danger, always remaining calm and focused. Sphamandla had just gotten back from a 2-week leave of absence to make arrangements for the funeral of his youngest daughter. The loss was a devastating one for his wife and 2 sons, but none more so than Sphamandla. A usually stoic man was utterly crushed by her passing. He'd long wanted a daughter, and she was the apple of his eye, the only one who could soften the strong and serious man's heart. And she was not even 2 years old when she died. After the ordeal, he was glad to be back in the open air, with the ground beneath his feet and the sounds of nature to help him grieve. And the job did not disappoint. The moment he came back to work, they received a tip-off that there was a group of poachers in the area that were targeting elephants. There was no time for chit-chat, and no need for him to hide his feelings. The more urgent the case, the better. Sphamandla just wanted to keep as busy as possible. Being alone with his grief was agony. No, this distraction was exactly what he needed now. Sphamandla's team flanked one side of the herd, while another stayed on the other side, hoping to cover as much ground as possible. When the evening came, they were relieved by 2 new teams, making sure that the elephants were always under the watchful eyes of the rangers, only to repeat the process the next morning. Sphamandla and his team spent 2 days searching for signs that people were in the area. Hours spent in absolute silence, their firearms at the ready, and following behind the herd at a safe distance. 2 kept their eyes on the field to look out for movement amongst the bushes and trees, while Sphamandla and another man searched on the ground, looking for footprints, debris, and splashes of blood from a wounded animal. On the 3rd morning, at 5 o'clock sharp, just as they clocked in for the new shift, they finally found the remnants of a campfire and human debris. At last, they had a trail to follow. The hunt was on. For half an hour, they continued following the footprints. The elephants had gone for a morning drink, and inevitably the criminals followed suit, and the team weren't far behind. The ground beneath their feet squelched as they neared the river's mucky bank. Sphamandla was at the head of the team, the others just a few yards behind, their rifles raised and at the ready. The elephants had trampled a path clear to the riverbank, and at its head there was a sharp bend. Sphamandla came around the corner first, his eyes looking down at the boot prints ahead of him. He didn't even notice the gray mound resting on the muddy bank that was right in front of him. The hippo male jumped in shock at the tall figure striding so confidently toward it. Never in all its life had the king of the river ever had any animal or human walk up to it so confidently. Its anger was as instant as it was deadly. It shook off its surprise and bellowed in fury. Sphamandla came to a sudden halt when the deafening roar broke the silence of the bush around him, and by the time he realized just what he'd walked into, he was just 6 yards away from the beast, practically right on top of it. The hippopotamus is not called the most mean-tempered animal in all of Africa for nothing. That thing was already charging when it opened its gigantic mouth to roar in anger. There was no running now, not against an animal that can cover 15 miles an hour on land. He was just too close to even try. Sphamandla did the only thing he could do. He raised his rifle and managed to pull the trigger, letting one shot loose. Unfortunately, it hit the beast in the layers of thick fat on its shoulder. The creature didn't even react to the bullet that embedded in its body. It didn't bother to bite the man in front of it, or to pause, or stop from the blast. It simply steamrolled 1.5 tons right over Sphamandla like he was nothing. That one charge drove the ranger several inches into the wet river bank, breaking almost every rib, both collarbones, and shattering both his legs in several places. His organs ruptured from the pressure, flooding his body with blood. Behind them, the 3 rangers heard the roar, a scream, and a single gunshot. They immediately fell into formation, guns loaded, and headed straight for the commotion ahead. Had it been anyone else, they would have faltered at the horrific sight that they ran into. But these guys had seen their fair share of death and blood. They did not hesitate to do what they had to. The hippo wasn't just satisfied by crushing the man. It turned back, grabbed Sphamandla up in its mouth, and bit down with a bite force of 2,000 psi. The rangers opened fire, reloading their heavy hunting rifles after each round. One after the other, the bullets flew, yet the beast didn't stop. It just kept chomping down, opening its mouth and biting down again, shaking its head so furiously that Sphamandla turned into a wild blur of flailing limbs and blood. It was as if its fury made it immune to pain. It took less than 15 seconds and almost a dozen rounds before it suddenly stopped, keeled over, and dropped down dead. Just like that, one moment it was consumed by a vicious, roaring anger, and the next a bullet finally landed right beneath one of its ears, puncturing its brain. Sphamandla's lifeless body was still trapped in its jaws. There was so much blood that it created a stream of its own that trickled into the river, turning the water crimson. Even the hippo's body was no longer gray. It was as red as everything around it, and so was Sphamandla. As one radioed in for help, the other 2 forced the jaws open and removed their teammate. Somehow he was still breathing, unconscious but still alive, but that was almost worse than if he'd been dead. For no more than 2 minutes, his gargled breathing drowned out the river stream, and the team listened to the terrible sound of his blood-filled lungs drowning from the inside. With every labored breath, more blood poured from the 9 gaping wounds that riddled his body. Sphamandla was long dead by the time help arrived just 10 minutes later. Leaving the hippo behind without a second glance, they loaded Sphamandla into the back of a jeep. They were just taking a body back to a family that were now grieving their second loss in less than a month. Only when they loaded their brother in the back of the ambulance did they finally give in to their horror and grief, collapsing into one another, bloody, exhausted, and utterly devastated. Sphamandla's family, too, were inconsolable. The past few weeks had been a seemingly never-ending nightmare. They opted not to view the body at the morgue. His remains were so broken and torn up that it would have just added to the unbearable trauma that Sphamandla's wife already had to deal with. Later, when a recovery team went back to remove the hippo, they found Sphamandla's rifle. Its thick metallic muzzle was bent at a 90-degree angle from one of the animal's gigantic feet stepping on it. Its firing pins were removed, and it was hung in the Rangers' barracks as a tribute to the man they admired and loved, but also as a stark reminder that armed poachers aren't the only things out there that you should fear. And the poachers, well, they never caught them. It's certain that they were out there somewhere. But with the commotion of jeeps and scores of people flocking to the area, the elephants that they were targeting fled so quickly into the deeper park that it's assumed they gave up their chase, for the time being at least. Incidents like this, combined with the ever-present danger of dying in a gunfight, contribute to the substantial respect the anti-poachers receive. Every day on the job could be their last. Around every corner they could meet their terrifying final affliction.